This is Optimal Relationships Daily, episode 1600, an excerpt from The Joys of Jet Lag, Part 2, by Medina. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to ORD with me, your host and narrator, Greg Audino. Welcome back for the 1600th time, that is. Today, we'll be wrapping up the rest of a wonderful book excerpt I began narrating from yesterday, courtesy of Medina, one of the network's contributing authors, whose work we've always enjoyed. Go ahead and listen to yesterday's part 1 if you haven't done so already. But if you're all caught up, then let's jump right back in and continue optimizing your life. An excerpt from The Joys of Jet Lag, Part 2, by Medina. After our time in Vinales, we arrived in Trinidad the day prior to Castro's death. The charming city grabbed hold of my history-loving heart immediately. Its past was prevalent everywhere you looked, from the cobblestone streets and the quaint town squares to the aging walls of our casa, all dating back hundreds of years to when it was a bustling colonial town. As with much of Cuba, its history and present shared common ground. The deteriorating and shadowy walls of the early 18th century Iglesia de Santa Ana were brought to life by the sound of young boys playing football within the poorly padlocked doors. That day, we explored like others did. Mojito in one hand, occasionally petting the friendliest street dogs ever with the other. Nearly everywhere we went, music was playing, and people were taking full advantage of the moment, laughing joyously and dancing on the cobblestone streets. I chose to partake in the laughing rather than the dancing. It's been noted on multiple occasions that I can eat salsa much better than I can dance it. The day passed quickly and slowly, like travel days tend to do. We eventually called it a night, only to wake up the next day to a completely different city. We woke to an outstanding breakfast on our casa's outdoor terrace. It was $5 for coffee, tea, fresh mango juice, my ultimate weakness, eggs, ham, tropical fruit, toast, crepes, and surprisingly, breakfast cookies. When we were mid-feast, Marioli, the casa's owner, walked up to us with a grave expression. She told us that Fidel Castro had passed away very early that morning. It was one of those moments in which time stood still, and the importance of the event made your hair stand on end. The country would be in mourning for 9 days. No banks, no music, no fiestas, no sale of alcohol. Marioli began to tear up as she said that they had lost their hero and walked in a daze back to her room. The breakfast cookies lost their appeal almost immediately. The soundtrack of Trinidad was replaced with the murmur of countless television sets playing footage of Castro throughout his life. No marketplaces were set up, and even the street dogs seemed somber. Since we only had one night left in Trinidad, we decided to spend the Saturday evening wandering the silent streets. The echo of horse hooves clomping against the cobbled roads, paired with the dim amber lights, made it far too easy to imagine life when Trinidad was a bustling pirate town in the 1500s. The Sunday following our magical Saturday night of solitude, we left for Santa Clara, where we would spend our last night before heading back to the United States. After settling into our casa, we wandered the streets and were surprised to see the buildings surrounding Parque Vidal being cleaned with rushed determination. Exterior walls were scrubbed and painted, windows washed, and plants trimmed. The city was preparing for the nationwide procession honoring Castro that would begin the next day. The following morning, after indulging in another breakfast feast, we walked back to Parque Vidal, only to see thousands of people lined up around the blocks waiting to offer their condolences. People of all ages stood in a seemingly endless line that wound throughout the city center, many holding flowers and photos of Castro. The strong sense of national community was unlike anything I'd ever seen, and yet, the general opinion of Castro varied widely. He was loved or hated depending on how his decisions affected a person. It was a reminder to keep an open mind and recognize that the impact of circumstance changes from person to person. I returned to the United States with a feeling of reverse culture shock and immense gratitude for having witnessed such a raw version of Cuba. People seemed more connected to each other than to their phones. Although they didn't have much, everyone cared for and appreciated what they had. Their resilience let them view the twists and turns of life with humor and connectedness. And if all else failed, they would tell us that a little vitamin R seemed to help, their charming euphemism for rum. It was a reminder to reflect on our priorities and appreciate what is truly important. What are we looking for? What are we living for? Sometimes we get so caught up in the motions of working, earning, and consuming that we forget to pause and ask ourselves why. In societies of abundance, we often overlook the gifts that we've been given. We tend to take for granted our relationships with our loved ones and the comforts of our daily lives. If we strip away all the distraction, we might be able to see that we have similar priorities as Roberto, to take pride in what we do, appreciate what we have, and love the ones we're with. You just listened to part 2 of an excerpt from The Joys of Jet Lag by Kat Medina. And a great finish from Kat today. I think I speak for all of us here in the network when I say how proud I am of her to see how she's progressed in her career and how beautifully her writing has evolved. And to no surprise, she has left us with some wonderful self-reflection questions here today. And since this show's goal is to help you fortify your relationships, I'll add one self-reflection question of my own. When you do consider the note that Kat ended on, what we're living for, what we're working for, what we're consuming, earning, etc., in addition to asking yourself why, also ask yourself how these choices are impacting your relationships. In what ways do many of your biggest life choices and means of spending your time take away from or add value to your relationships? It's not a question for the faint of heart, but it is an important one nonetheless. So, have fun with that one. It's time to wrap things up for today, my friends. As always, I thank you for joining. I thank you for further supporting Kat's work. And being that it is Sunday, we have another episode ready for you as well, our weekly bonus episode. So I hope to see you there, where your optimal life awaits.